The night the sky split open, Darren Fisher was used to the silence of midnight. In the small forgotten town of Ravenshill, nights were empty, no blaring horns, no flashing lights, just a blanket of stars stretching across the black expanse above. For most, it was peaceful. For Darren, it felt like a prison. At 29, life was predictable. He spent his days at Fisher's Auto, his family's garage, repairing cars for people who never thanked him, and his nights staring at the sky, searching for something he couldn't name. Tonight was no different. He lay on the roof of his crumbling shed, hands behind his head, feeling the cool metal pressing into his spine. Then it happened. A crack split the air, sharp, electric, and wrong. The stars above him seemed to ripple like disturbed water. Darren sat up, his heart hammering in his chest as a blinding beam of light tore through the darkness, arcing across the sky. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a meteor. It was alive. He blinked, unable to move, as the beam of light suddenly halted, like it had spotted him. The silence grew heavy, suffocating, as if the night itself held its breath. "What the hell?" Darren whispered. Before he could react, the light plunged downward. A streak of silver fire erupted in the sky, roaring toward the empty field behind his house. His instincts screamed for him to run, but his legs refused to obey. Instead, he stumbled off the shed, barely managing to land on his feet as he sprinted toward the source. When he reached the field, the grass was flattened in a perfect circle, smoke rising in faint tendrils. And at its center, glowing faintly under the moonlight, was a ship, sleek, metallic, and humming softly as if it were breathing. Darren's chest rose and fell rapidly. "This can't be real," he muttered. Then the hatch hissed. From within the ship she emerged. The woman, no, the being, stepped into the open air, her presence defying everything Darren understood about life. Her hair fell in shimmering waves, a blend of silver and midnight, and her skin seemed to capture the glow of the ship, radiant and iridescent. But it was her eyes that stopped him, deep, swirling pools of color, like galaxies had been trapped within them. She looked straight at him, her expression both calm and urgent. "You are Darren Fisher," she said, her voice melodic yet firm. Darren staggered back. "Oh, what?" She tilted her head slightly, as if considering him. "I have traveled far to find you." You have the wrong guy," Darren stammered, his voice cracking. "I fix cars. I'm not even that good at it. What are you? Who are you?" She stepped forward, and Darren resisted the urge to flee. "My name is Lyra," she said softly, "and I need your help." Before Darren could demand answers, a sudden rumble filled the air. The ground beneath his feet quivered. Lyra's expression shifted to something sharp and determined. "They found us," she said, turning toward the sky. Darren followed her gaze, his heart nearly stopping as two dark shapes descended through the clouds, massive angular crafts with glowing red symbols etched across their surface. They moved like predators, cutting through the night with terrifying speed. "What the hell is going on?" Darren shouted. Lyra grabbed his wrist, her grip stronger than it looked. "We must go. Now." "Go where?" "To survive." Before Darren could argue, Lyra raised her free hand. A soft pulse of energy radiated outward, and the hatch of the ship opened again, revealing its glowing, futuristic interior. Behind them, the alien crafts began to fire, bright red energy bolts slamming into the earth, sending dirt and flames into the air. "Move," Lyra shouted. Adrenaline surging, Darren stumbled after her, barely making it into the ship as the ground exploded behind him. The hatch hissed shut, sealing them inside. Darren collapsed onto the smooth floor, gasping for air as the ship lurched violently upward. Through the window, he could see the alien crafts giving chase, their weapons flaring to life. "What did I just get into?" Darren breathed, his voice shaking. Lyra's fingers danced across a glowing control panel, her expression calm yet focused. You, Darren Fisher, are far more important than you know. And if we don't escape, your importance will end here." The ship jolted, energy blasts narrowly missing its hull. Outside, the night sky turned into chaos, stars blurring past as Lyra piloted them into the unknown. Darren pressed his hands to his temples, struggling to process what was happening. Minutes ago, he'd been staring at the stars, wishing for something extraordinary. Now, he wished for his old life back. The truth beyond the stars. The ship vibrated violently as it rocketed through the upper atmosphere, the roar of energy blasts fading behind them. Darren sat slumped in his seat, chest heaving, trying to hold on to some scrap of reality. A minute ago, he'd been in his backyard. Now, he was flying through space in a glowing alien craft, piloted by a woman who claimed to have come for him. He glanced at her. Lyra sat in the pilot's seat, her fingers gliding over holographic controls that pulsed with light. Her expression remained serene, as though she wasn't ripping through the heavens with two hostile ships in pursuit. "What the hell is happening?" Darren finally shouted, his voice cracking. "Who are you? Why are those things shooting at us? And why are you here for me?" Lyra didn't look at him, her focus locked on the controls. "You need answers, Darren, but this is not the time for them." "Not the time," Darren barked. "We're being hunted by spaceships. I think it's exactly the time." Suddenly, the ship jolted again, tossing Darren forward. Through the viewport, two dark crafts, sleek, angular, and humming with red energy, closed in on either side. Darren's stomach dropped as glowing weapons flared to life. Lyra's calm faltered. "They're persistent," she muttered. "What are they?" Darren gripped the sides of his seat. "They're hunters," she replied, her tone hardening. "Agents of the Vire Consortium, a ruthless empire that spreads across half the known galaxy." "And what do they want with me?" Lyra's gaze flicked toward him for the first time, and for a moment, Darren swore he saw sympathy in her swirling eyes. "Because you, Darren Fisher, hold something the Vire want." Darren shook his head, incredulous. "What could I possibly have? I'm a mechanic in a backwater town. I don't even have health insurance." Lyra raised her hand, and a glowing hologram appeared in front of him. It showed something impossible, a swirling crystalline light deep inside a human figure. "It's not what you have. It's what you are. Your DNA carries an ancient energy, an energy that hasn't existed in millennia. We call it the Astra Key." Darren's brain spun. DNA, energy. What does that even mean? Before Lyra could answer, alarms blared across the cabin, and the ship lurched hard to the right. The hunters had fired again, energy bolts grazing the ship's hull, leaving trails of crackling flame. Lyra gripped the controls, her expression sharpening into pure determination. "They've locked onto us," she growled. "Fantastic," Darren muttered, gripping his seat like it might keep him alive. "We're gonna die. I've been abducted by aliens, and I'm gonna die." "You're not going to die," Lyra snapped, her voice suddenly fierce. "Not while I'm here." With a flick of her wrist, the ship's dashboard lit up, and Darren watched in awe as the holographic controls expanded, surrounding Lyra with glowing panels. She pressed one, and Darren felt his stomach churn as the ship angled downward, nosediving toward the glowing curvature of Earth below. "What are you doing?" Darren yelled. "Changing the rules," Lyra said with a small smile. "They won't expect us to turn back." The hunter ships followed, their weapons raining red energy blasts. Lyra's ship spun and dove like a bird avoiding a predator, zipping between attacks with impossible precision. Through the viewport, Darren could see clouds streaking by as they re-entered Earth's atmosphere. The hunter crafts followed, but their sleek hulls glowed red-hot as they slammed through the thickening air. "They can't withstand Earth's atmosphere for long," Lyra explained, her voice steady. "If I can just—" A shudder ran through the ship as one of the hunter's blasts connected, knocking the craft into a spin. Darren's vision blurred as everything twisted around him. The alarm screamed, matching his pounding heart. "Lyra, I've got it," she shouted, pulling hard on the controls. The ship stabilized at the last possible moment, skimming the tops of the clouds before shooting forward in a burst of speed. Darren exhaled, his fingers sore from how tightly he'd been gripping the armrests. Behind them, the hunter crafts slowed, red energy flaring across their hulls. As they turned back toward space, "They're retreating?" Darren asked, panting. "For now," Lyra said, easing the controls. "The Vire won't risk burning up their ships, but they'll return." The ship coasted gently over the Earth, the horizon glowing with the first hints of dawn. Darren let out a long, shaky breath, trying to slow his racing thoughts. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice quiet. "Why come all this way for me?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes softening. "Because you're more than just a man, Darren. You're the only one who can awaken the Astra Key. Without it, the Vire Consortium will conquer worlds beyond counting. Your existence, your very life, is the key to stopping them." Darren blinked, his mind reeling. He'd spent his entire life feeling small, insignificant, like he was nothing more than a gear in someone else's machine. And now, in the span of an hour, this alien woman was telling him he held the fate of the galaxy in his DNA. "I didn't ask for this," Darren whispered. "No," Lyra said softly. "But sometimes the universe chooses us." The ship slowed, drifting toward a stretch of wilderness. Lyra's fingers danced across the controls one last time, and the vessel landed gently in a clearing. Outside, the faint sounds of Earth, birds, wind, life, began to filter in. Darren unbuckled his seatbelt and stood shakily. "What now?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes deep and unyielding. "Now we prepare. The Vire will come. And when they do, you must be ready." Darren swallowed hard, glancing out at the rising sun. Yesterday, his biggest worry had been fixing a busted carburetor. Today, he was at the center of something he couldn't even begin to understand. But for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, a small flicker of purpose. And as the dawn broke across the clearing, Darren Fisher realized there was no turning back. The message from the stars. The clearing was quiet, the kind of stillness Darren Fisher had once found comforting. Birds chirped lazily in the distance, wind rustled through the tall pines, and the world seemed oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded above its skies. Darren stood outside the sleek alien craft, his hands in his pockets as if he were contemplating a bad life choice. Lyra worked inside, scanning her ship's systems for damage. The strange hum of the vessel was the only reminder that what had just happened, the dogfight in space, the truth about his DNA, wasn't some fever dream. How does a mechanic end up here? Darren muttered to himself, scuffing his boot against the dirt. Lyra's voice broke the quiet. "It's not where you are that matters, Darren. It's where you're going." He turned to see her standing in the open hatch, bathed in soft light. In her hand, she held a device, a small silver orb no bigger than a baseball that pulsed faintly, like it had its own heartbeat. "What's that?" Darren asked, frowning. "A map," Lyra replied. "A message from the past, left for those like you." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Like me?" Lyra stepped closer, holding the orb out. "You're not just carrying the Astra Key in your DNA, Darren. You're part of something ancient, something left behind when my ancestors visited Earth thousands of years ago." Darren stared at the orb, his mind struggling to keep up. "Wait, you're saying aliens have been here before?" Lyra nodded. "Earth was not always as isolated as it is now. Your planet was once visited by many who traveled the stars. My people, the Elorians, were among them. We came not as conquerors, but as watchers. Guardians." Darren snorted. "Well, you didn't guard much. We're not exactly winning the whole humans are smart contest." Lyra smiled faintly. "Not everything is as it seems." She pressed a hidden button on the orb, and suddenly, Darren's sarcastic retort died on his lips. A holographic map exploded into the air around them, a vast projection of space, shimmering lines of light connecting distant stars. He turned in awe, watching galaxies swirl, points of light flickering like candle flames. "This is the path of the Astra Key," Lyra explained, her voice soft. "It's a trail left behind by my ancestors, a warning and a safeguard. The Vire Consortium discovered fragments of it centuries ago, but they could never unlock its full power." Darren looked at her, still turning under the brilliant hologram. "And I'm the key. Me." Lyra's eyes glimmered in the soft light. "Yes." Darren shook his head, still not buying it. "You've got the wrong guy. I don't have power. I don't have knowledge. I change tires, Lyra. I'm nobody." "No," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "You are more than you realize, Darren. You think strength lies in what you do, but strength lies in what you are. Humanity's greatest power is its resilience, its ability to rise when no one believes it can." Her words settled on him like a weight, too heavy to shake off. Darren let his eyes drift back to the map. One glowing star burned brighter than the rest, a deep blue beacon surrounded by swirling light. "What's that?" Darren asked, pointing. Lyra followed his gaze. "That is Ilaris, the heart of the Astra Key's power. If we reach it, we can stop the Vire. But first, we need to prepare." "Prepare," Darren repeated warily. "For what?" As if on cue, a distant rumble filled the air. The ground beneath Darren's boots trembled slightly. Birds scattered from the trees, their cries echoing through the clearing. Lyra's expression darkened. "They'd found us again." Darren spun toward the horizon, and his blood turned to ice. Low in the distance, a dark shape broke through the morning mist. One of the hunter ships, its angular silhouette slicing toward them like a predator ready to pounce. "Already," Darren shouted, panic rising in his chest. "I thought they couldn't track us." "They shouldn't be able to," Lyra said grimly, shoving the orb into a small pouch at her side. "But they've adapted faster than I expected. Get inside the ship. Now." Darren didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted toward the open hatch as the sound of the ship's engines grew louder. A series of mechanical lines cut through the air, followed by a sudden high-pitched hum. "Lyra," he yelled, turning to see her standing her ground outside, her hands raised. From the hunter ship, a beam of red energy lanced downward, cutting across the field in a fiery line. Lyra's body glowed faintly, and with a swift motion, she flung her arms outward. A pulse of blue light erupted from her hands, colliding with the red beam and sending shockwaves rippling through the air. The two energies fought, colliding in an explosion of sparks and light. Inside, Lyra screamed, breaking the stalemate and sprinting toward the ship. Darren scrambled up the ramp, nearly tripping as he collapsed into the cabin. Lyra followed seconds later, slamming the hatch shut behind her. "They're not letting up," she said, rushing to the controls. "We need to get out of here." The ship jolted to life, its engines roaring as it began to rise. Darren staggered into the co-pilot's seat, his heart pounding as the hunter ship loomed closer. "Can we fight them?" he asked, gripping the sides of the chair. "Not yet," Lyra replied, her voice tight with focus. "We're outmatched." "So what now?" "We run." With a roar, the ship burst forward, darting low over the treetops as the hunter gave chase. Darren watched the viewport, his stomach twisting as blasts of red energy streaked past them, missing by mere feet. "This is insane," he yelled. Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile. "Welcome to life among the stars, Darren Fisher." And as the ship tore through the sky, leaving Earth's wilderness behind, Darren realized two things. One, his quiet, predictable life was gone forever. And two, somewhere deep inside him, buried under layers of doubt, that flicker of purpose had grown stronger. The universe had chosen him, whether he liked it or not. The secrets of the Astra Key, The world outside the viewport turned to a blur, endless streaks of blue and white, as Lyra's ship pierced the atmosphere and shot into space. Darren Fisher sat frozen in the co-pilot's seat, his breath uneven. Earth shrank behind them, a distant blue dot swallowed by darkness. "Space," Darren whispered, the word feeling unreal on his tongue. "I'm in space." "You'll want to strap in," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. Her hands moved effortlessly over the glowing controls, navigating them further from the threat behind. Darren fumbled for the harness, his hand shaking as reality sank in. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. He was sitting inside a real alien ship, light years away from Ravenshill, where he'd woken up that morning complaining about his coffee being too weak. "How did my life turn into an episode of Twilight Zone?" he muttered. "Darren," Lyra's voice cut through his spiral of panic. "You need to listen carefully. We don't have much time." He turned toward her, swallowing hard. "You keep saying that. Time for what?" Lyra tapped a button on the control panel, and the front viewport dimmed, replaced with a vast, glowing holographic diagram, an intricate network of stars, symbols, and shapes connected by swirling paths of light. At the center, one object pulsed brighter than the rest. "This," Lyra said softly, "is the Astra Key, an ancient energy source. The Vire Consortium will stop at nothing to control it. And you," she turned to him, her gaze piercing, "are the last link to finding it." Darren blinked, his brow furrowing. "I still don't get it. Why me? I don't have alien energy or superpowers. I'm just some guy who forgot to take out the trash last night." Lyra's lips curved faintly, but her tone remained serious. "You carry the Astra Key within you, Darren, not as a physical object, but in your DNA. My people built safeguards long ago. They passed fragments of the Astra Key's energy into certain bloodlines on Earth, hidden and dormant for generations. It was meant to stay buried. Until now." Darren sat back, staring at the holographic display. "So, unlike some kind of space vault." Lyra inclined her head. "In a way, yes. The Vire have spent centuries searching for it, tearing apart planets and enslaving civilizations. If they unlock the Astra Key, they will control a power that can bend reality itself." Darren let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. "Reality. Great. This just keeps getting better." Before Lyra could reply, a soft alarm chimed on the control panel. Her expression darkened, and the hologram flickered away. "What now?" Darren asked, dreading the answer. Lyra's hands moved quickly. "A Vire probe. It's tracking us. Again. How?" "Their sensors must have locked onto our energy signature before we escaped." Darren gripped the sides of his seat as Lyra's fingers danced across the controls. Outside the viewport, the black void of space twisted, stars elongating into streaks of white as the ship jolted into faster-than-light travel. Darren's stomach dropped, and he squeezed his eyes shut. When he finally dared to open them, the ship was gliding smoothly through what looked like a shimmering tunnel of light, bending and warping in strange patterns. It was both beautiful and unsettling. "What is this?" Darren asked, his voice softer now. "Slipstream," Lyra explained, her focus on the ship's systems, "a corridor through subspace that allows us to travel faster than light." Darren slumped back in his chair. "You know, I was supposed to change someone's brakes tomorrow. This wasn't exactly on my schedule." Lyra gave him a sidelong glance, something almost amused flickering in her expression. "I don't think your schedule will ever be the same again." The humor was fleeting. Her face turned serious once more as she stood and grabbed a small, glowing device from the panel. "We'll need to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" Darren asked warily. Lyra gestured for him to follow her deeper into the ship. "For what's coming next. The training begins." The interior of the ship was larger than Darren had expected. Smooth, curved walls lit by faint blue pulses of light. The deeper they walked, the more alien it felt, like the ship was alive and breathing around them. Finally, Lyra stopped in a circular room with a domed ceiling. At its center was a platform surrounded by glowing, translucent pillars. "What is this place?" Darren asked. Lyra stepped to the platform, holding the small device. "This is a training chamber. You'll need to understand your connection to the Astra Key, and I'll teach you to defend yourself." Darren scoffed. "Defend myself? Against what? You've seen me. I'm not exactly Bruce Lee." "Strength doesn't come from muscle alone," Lyra replied. "It comes from the mind. Your DNA carries the Astra Key's resonance. We can activate small portions of its energy to help you adapt." "Activate?" Darren's voice rose an octave. "You're gonna mess with my DNA. I'm pretty sure I didn't sign up for this." "You didn't," Lyra said simply. "But if you want to survive, you don't have a choice." Darren hesitated. He wanted to argue, to fight back. But the image of those Vire ships, cold, merciless, and relentless, flashed through his mind. He let out a breath, resigned. "Fine. What do I do?" Lyra smiled faintly, holding the glowing device toward him. "Stand on the platform and trust me." Darren stepped forward, his heartbeat loud in his ears. As soon as his feet touched the platform, the pillars pulsed with energy. Lines of light flowed across the walls, converging at the ceiling above. The device in Lyra's hand flared to life, and Darren felt a jolt, not painful, but startling, course through his body. His vision blurred, his senses sharpened, and for a brief moment, he felt connected, like he could see something bigger than himself. "What's happening?" Darren whispered. "The Astra Key is waking up," Lyra said, her voice distant. "This is just the beginning, Darren." The light dimmed, and Darren stumbled off the platform, breathing hard. He felt different, not stronger, exactly, but aware, like he was tuned into a frequency he hadn't noticed before. He looked at Lyra, and for the first time, his voice carried something firm. "What now?" Lyra nodded approvingly. "Now we find Ilaris, before the Vire find us." Echoes of a forgotten world. The slipstream tunnel outside the ship was mesmerizing. Swirls of iridescent light twisting and bending like liquid starlight. Darren Fisher stared out at it, his thoughts a jumble of disbelief and quiet awe. He still hadn't gotten used to the idea that space, the actual universe, was no longer something he saw in documentaries or through the lens of a telescope. It was now his reality. Lyra sat silently at the helm, her eyes focused on the holographic map projected above the console. The pulsing star labeled Ilaris blinked like a distant heartbeat. The Vire were closing in, and time was slipping away. Darren broke the silence. "So, this place we're headed. Ilaris. What's there? More aliens? Death traps? Or just an even weirder version of my life?" Lyra didn't smile. Instead, her gaze remained steady as she spoke. Ilaris was once a sanctuary, a forgotten world where the Astra Key's energy was safeguarded after it fractured across the stars. "Was." Darren frowned. "Now, it's abandoned," Lyra replied softly. "Time devoured it, and those who sought its secrets vanished into legend. No one has seen it for centuries, until the map reactivated with your arrival." Darren's chest tightened. "Great, so we're flying into an alien ghost town." Before Lyra could respond, a soft ping echoed through the cabin. The slipstream began to ripple, threads of light shifting in strange patterns. Lyra's expression darkened as her fingers danced over the console. "We're not alone." Darren's stomach sank. "What do you mean, not alone?" The shimmering tunnel outside cracked, as if glass were splintering. Suddenly, the ship lurched, flinging Darren forward in his seat. The light around them shattered, giving way to the darkness of open space. And there, emerging from nothingness, was a Vire hunter ship. Its jagged black hull glowed ominously with red runes, and its weapons pulsed like a beating heart. "Oh, come on," Darren shouted, gripping the armrest as the ship rattled. "How do they keep finding us?" Lyra's jaw tightened. They must have hacked into the old slipstream pathways. They're pulling us out of subspace. A sudden boom echoed through the ship as the hunter fired. Energy streaked across the void, narrowly missing their hull. Lyra grabbed the controls. Hold on. The ship veered sharply, spinning like a leaf caught in a hurricane. Darren's vision blurred as gravity twisted unnaturally. Sparks flared across the control panel as Lyra fought to regain control. Do something, Darren shouted, panic rising. Lyra's hands moved with lightning speed. I'm taking us down. If we can't escape them up here, we'll lose them on the surface of Elaris. Surface. Darren's voice cracked. You mean we're crashing? Landing. Lyra corrected sharply. Controlled landing. Darren's heart pounded as the view through the viewport shifted. Below them, a planet loomed. Elaris. It was a dark, shadowed world, covered in swirling clouds and punctuated by jagged mountains and cracked deserts. Lightning flashed across its surface like fractured veins of energy. Looks super welcoming, Darren muttered. Brace yourself, Lyra shouted. The hunter ship loomed closer, its weapons charging for another shot. Lyra pushed the controls forward, and the ship plunged into Elaris's atmosphere. Heat flared across the viewport, turning the world into a haze of fire and smoke. Darren closed his eyes and gripped his harness. I am so gonna die. The descent was violent. The ship rattled and bucked as they sliced through layers of dense, storm-filled clouds. Darren could hear the crackle of energy outside and the groaning of the hull as it absorbed the punishment. Then, with a sudden jolt, everything stopped. Darren's eyes flew open as the ship slammed onto solid ground, skidding across a barren, cracked landscape before finally coming to a shuddering halt. Silence followed, save for the faint hum of the ship's systems struggling to stabilize. We're alive, Darren said weakly, looking around. Lyra exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. For now. The viewport cleared, revealing the landscape outside. Elaris. The ground was ash-gray and fractured, like the surface of an old dying world. Strange jagged rock formations jutted from the earth, and swirling clouds blocked out the light from the sun. Occasional streaks of lightning arced across the horizon, throwing eerie shadows across the ground. Darren unbuckled his harness, his hands shaking. So, where to now? Lyra stood and grabbed a small metallic pack. We followed the signal. She gestured toward the holographic map on her wrist. The Astra Key's resonance is strongest here. Right, Darren muttered, dragging himself to his feet, because walking across a creepy alien wasteland is definitely my idea of a good time. Lyra turned to him, her tone serious. Stay close. Elaris may be abandoned, but its defenses were built to protect the Astra Key at all costs. If the Vire are here, they'll be hunting us too. As the hatch slid open, a wave of cold air rushed inside, carrying with it the faint scent of something metallic, almost like burned steel. Darren hesitated at the edge, staring out at the wasteland. You sure we're not walking into a trap? He asked. Lyra glanced back at him, her swirling eyes glinting with determination. The only way to find out is to move forward. Darren sighed, following her into the unknown. As his boots crunched against the cracked ground, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence pressing around him. There was no sound of life, no birds, no wind, just an eerie stillness that made his skin crawl. He looked up at the stormy skies, then at Lyra striding purposefully ahead. Hey, Darren called, his voice low. Do you ever get the feeling you're not alone, even when no one's there? Lyra paused, turning slightly. On Elaris, you're never alone, even if you can't see them. Darren shivered, and as the storm clouds swirled overhead, lightning flashing like angry fire, he realized that something unseen was watching them and waiting. Whispers in the dark. The ground beneath Darren's boots felt brittle, crumbling like ancient bones with each step. Elaris stretched out before him like a graveyard of a forgotten civilization. dark, silent, and broken. The jagged mountains in the distance were wrapped in sheets of flickering lightning, their peaks obscured by swirling clouds. Yet it wasn't the emptiness that unsettled him. It was the feeling, like an invisible weight pressing on his chest, whispering to him that he shouldn't be here. "Do you feel that?" Darren asked, his voice hushed. Lyra didn't turn as she moved ahead, her steps sure and deliberate. "The echoes of Eluris. This planet is alive, but it's not welcoming." "Comforting," Darren muttered, rubbing his arms as a chill ran down his spine. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see shadows following them through the mist. The pair moved deeper into the landscape, the silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Lyra led the way, her wrist device pulsing faintly with blue light as it tracked the Astra Key's signal. Darren followed closely, his eyes darting nervously to the strange formations rising from the earth, twisting spires of obsidian that almost seemed melted. "What happened here?" Darren finally asked. "This place feels wrong." Lyra slowed, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "Eluris was once a sanctuary, as I told you. But when the Astra Key's energy fractured, this world became unstable. The resonance of that power lingered, warping the land, twisting everything it touched. Those who remained were consumed." Consumed. Darren stopped in his tracks, like dead consumed or zombie consumed. Lyra turned to look at him, her expression solemn. "Their bodies may be gone, but their presence remains. The echoes of their souls are trapped here, tied to the Astra Key's energy." Darren swallowed hard, suddenly wishing he'd stayed on the ship. "Awesome. Haunted alien planet. I really hit the jackpot." Lyra ignored his sarcasm and gestured to a fissure in the ground ahead. "The signal grows stronger underground. We need to move quickly. The fire will not be far behind." Darren peered into the fissure, a gaping maw that seemed to inhale the faint light around it. The air rising from below was ice cold and carried a sound he couldn't quite place, like a distant hum or maybe whispering voices. "Underground," he said, his voice cracking. "Look, I've seen this movie. This is the part where something eats us." "Trust me," Lyra replied, already moving toward the opening. Darren hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around and bolt for the ship, but he forced himself to follow her. "What's the worst that could happen?" he thought, grimacing as he stepped into the fissure. The descent. The tunnel was vast and hollow, its walls shimmering faintly with streaks of crystalline blue light. Darren couldn't tell if it was natural or something else, like the planet itself had been sculpted by ancient hands. The further they went, the stronger the hum grew, resonating in his bones. "Where's that sound coming from?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly. "It's the key's energy," Lyra said quietly. "It calls to those connected to it." Darren paused mid-step. "Wait, I hear it." "Why do I hear it?" Lyra looked over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Because it recognizes you." "Fantastic," Darren muttered, rubbing his temples. "The alien energy thing likes me. Great for my social life." As they continued deeper, the tunnel widened into a vast underground chamber. Darren's breath caught in his throat. The space was massive, stretching so far he couldn't see the walls. In the center of the chamber stood a colossal obelisk, its surface glowing faintly with swirling blue symbols. At its base, crystalline roots spread like veins, pulsating with energy that matched the hum filling the air. "That's it," Lyra whispered. "The heart of Eluris." Darren stared in awe. The obelisk was beautiful yet unsettling, alive in a way he couldn't explain. Its light seemed to pull at him, tugging at something deep inside. "Is it supposed to be doing that?" Darren asked, his voice unsteady. Lyra turned to him sharply. "Stay here. I need to disable the defense field before we can access it." "Defense field?" Darren's eyes widened. "You mean this thing fights back?" But Lyra didn't answer. She stepped closer to the obelisk, her wrist device glowing as she worked. Darren stayed behind, his heart pounding. The hum grew louder now, vibrating through the air. Then, a sound. It started as a whisper, faint and distant. Darren turned, squinting into the shadows. "Lyra, do you hear?" He froze. From the darkness at the edge of the chamber, figures began to emerge. Shadows, tall and humanoid, their forms rippling like smoke. Their eyes glowed faintly, cold and empty, as they advanced silently across the chamber floor. "Lyra," Darren shouted, backing up. "We've got company." Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. The echoes. "The what?" Darren's voice cracked. "They're drawn to the energy. Remnants of those lost here," Lyra explained hurriedly. "They won't stop until they consume its source." Darren glanced at the obelisk. "You mean me?" Before Lyra could respond, the shadows surged forward. Darren stumbled back, his heart racing as the nearest figure lunged for him, its smoky arms stretching unnaturally. "Nope, nope, nope," he shouted, diving out of the way. Lyra spun around, raising her hand. A surge of blue energy shot from her palm, cutting through the shadows like light through fog. "Keep moving," she shouted. Darren didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward Lyra, dodging as the shadows swarmed closer. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted him. The hum grew deafening now, matching the frantic pounding of his heart. Lyra's fingers danced across her device, and suddenly, the obelisk's glow pulsed brighter. The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering violently. "Now, Darren," Lyra shouted, "touch the obelisk." "What?" he cried. "Why me?" "Because it knows you. Go." Darren stared at the swirling energy for half a second longer before cursing under his breath. He sprinted forward, ignoring the shadows clawing at his heels. The moment his hand touched the obelisk, the chamber erupted in blinding light. A shockwave surged outward, shattering the shadows and filling the air with a chorus of whispers that rose to a deafening roar. Then silence. When Darren opened his eyes, he was kneeling at the base of the obelisk. The chamber was still, and the hum had faded to a faint murmur. Lyra stood over him, her expression one of awe. "You activated it." Darren blinked up at her, his hand still tingling. "What just happened?" Lyra offered him a hand, helping him to his feet. "You awakened the heart of Ilaris. The Astra key is yours now." Darren glanced at the obelisk, its glow reflecting in his wide eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel small or insignificant. He felt connected. But as the ground trembled beneath them and a deep rumbling noise echoed through the chamber, Darren realized it wasn't over. Something far worse had been awakened.